let's talk about comeback mechanics. Your initial snap reaction, I said comeback mechanics in fighting games, good or bad? What say you, chat? Overall, I know I saw some people saying like they're neutral or whatever, but like good or bad? Let's take a look at our poll and also take a look at this. This is what started it all. So in the comeback mechanic poll, 78% of you said you think it's good. The reason this got brought up in the first place is this tweet from Blasted Salami that says, can we please, 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 please stop rewarding players for losing in fighting games, please. So then High Fight says, comeback mechanics are a double-edged sword. It gives players hope that they still have a chance, but it will also make them mad when the opponent utilizes that chance. So I saw a lot of this. And to me, I didn't really think one way or another about this because, to be honest with you, my experience with comeback mechanics is pretty positive. But then if we go back to that nerd, this is a story all about how my KI guide got flipped all upside down, is making some tweet down here. He says, I actually think a well-implemented comeback mechanic is both totally fine in terms of competitive integrity and actually exciting for spectators and players alike. Both players have access to it, and it's rare one person gets it and kills the other before they get to use it too. And then his other tweets to High Fight, this guy, comeback factor defender, says, I think overall, the vast majority of comeback mechanics end up as a wash. In many rounds, both players use them or neither player uses them. And over the course of 50 games, the rounds where one person gets it but the other doesn't will be pretty equal. Think about like V-Trigger in Street Fighter. It's pretty rare that like one person uses V-Trigger or their V-reversals or whatever, then the other person never uses their V-triggers or V-reversals or whatever. And in KI, like with instincts, almost never do you see instincts like only used by one player and not used by the other player, or even ultras. It's really only MVC3 X Factor that's too strong. I think most people in the chat said the same thing, that X Factor is like the one that's like, well, yeah. And he says, I also think not enough discussion goes into the design space that opens up because of these mechanics. 2-bar versus 3-bar V-Trigger, when and how you use your KI instinct. They create some interesting choices in their inclusion in the game, right? So I was just thinking about the ones that I interact with the most. V-Trigger, and I was thinking about KI instinct. And I was like, do these open up interesting enough decision-making to justify these comeback mechanics being good for not only just spectators, but players in the game? And I think in both cases, the answer is yes. Think about V-Trigger, right? It's a bar that builds up. You can use it for V-reversals, which is your defensive option. You can use it for V-Trigger, which is typically an offensive option. And you can build it independently with V-skill, right? So some characters have great V-triggers, bad V-skills. They can't really build their V-gauge very reliable. Some of them have awesome V-skills, but they don't have V-triggers that are like super impactful. So maybe they'll V-reversal more. Do I take a 2-bar V-trigger, right, and just use it in a match? Or do I pick a 3-bar V-trigger and I wait on it, or I use it defensively a lot? Like, you know, you guys see this with Daigo's Guile a lot, right? It used to be the thing where, you know, Guile players would just activate V-Trigger and they would throw booms and all that kind of stuff. But now you see that the decision making for Daigo is, I'm just going to V-reversal a bunch. And you saw people start to also make decisions like in Street Fighter, they offensive V-reversal a lot, right? When they have someone in the corner and they block something, they offensive V-reversal to push you back into the corner. Then you have characters that have 3-bar V-triggers that are really powerful and they always want to use them. So because they want to hold on to that V-trigger, sometimes they just die because they refuse to V-reversal stuff. Killer Instinct is really similar. Instinct is a power-up. It's an install that they get, and it's on a bar separate, just like V-trigger. The difference is in KI, there's not really another way to build the gauge. There's not really a V-skill that you can use to do it, and there's also not a V-reversal. There's not another way to interact with the gauge. So because there's no other use of Instinct in KI, you always use it. But the decision-making comes from, I have 5% life or 2% life on my first life bar. Do I Instinct here? Most people say, hey, make sure you activate your instinct on your first life bar, but is it always worth it to activate it there? Should you instead wait until the next life bar? What happens if you activate instinct and then you immediately die and now your instinct drains out on the next bar and you don't get 2? It does create an interesting thing where in KI, some characters are really powerful without instinct, and maybe their instincts aren't even that good. Eagle is a great example of a character who is incredibly strong, but his instincts kind of whack. Then you have characters that are pretty good or pretty strong, and then once they're in instinct, they're incredibly good, right? And you get to design around that. You get to say like, well, this character is really good, and then once they have instinct, this is where they work. This is where they shine, right? Their instinct either changes how they play or completes the character or gives them some new tool or way to play an approach that is really fun. Yeah, Idol is the big example. His instinct is absurd. It's probably the best instinct in the game. They're just a meter that builds up, and once your character activates, they go from having this set of tools to this set of tools plus, right? Same thing in both games. No one thinks to themselves, well, in KI, these characters are whack, and then they get Instinct, and they become super fun and cool. Like, they're super fun and cool before they have Instinct. And then when they get Instinct, it's like cranked up to 11. And I think people feel like Street Fighter 5 characters are maybe like a 5 that gets cranked up to a 9 or something. You know what I mean? That's kind of the difference. Then someone brought up DBFZ. What do you think about sparking? People call it a comeback mechanic, and I guess it can be a comeback mechanic. But to me, it is not really a comeback mechanic at all. It started as a comeback mechanic. People used it on their last character to try to come back. But very quickly, by the end of the first year of competitive play, people realized sparking is a preventative measure, right? You don't use sparking to come back. You use sparking to prevent yourself from needing to come back. You use sparking so that your team lives. Because in that game, having 3 characters is a massive advantage over having 2 characters, is a massive advantage for having 1 character. It's either used as a way to destroy their team, right? Immediately kill a character, which is brutal for them, or it's used to save a character so that you don't lose a character. That's how it works. Very rare that it's used as a like comeback factor kind of mechanic. Now, Limit Break, on the other hand, is a straight up comeback mechanic. And a lot of people don't like that. It is straight up just a damage boost when it's the last character left. And I think that it exists partially because sparking is not used as a comeback mechanic. It's not really what it's designed for. And also because the game is so defense oriented and losing a character is so damaging. If you get the first few hits and a character dies, like, you're in such a huge disadvantage. Dude, you have to hit each character like 3 times. And that costs you like 5 meters. And then the next character, you have to hit him like 7 times. Like, you need so many hits to make a comeback like that. People brought up Rage and Tekken. There's certainly decisions you have to make around Rage and Tekken, right? Like, do you, the offensive player, hit someone into Rage with your combo? Or do you end the combo slightly early so that the next hit kills them? When you have Rage and you get a hit, do you spend Rage Art early? Do you save it? Do you save for a Rage Drive? Do you use your Rage Drive to push them to the wall instead of using a Rage Art so that you have wall position and to mix up into death? If you have a low Rage Drive, do you dash in someone's face to make them scared to then do your mid instead of doing the low Rage Drive? These are all mechanical and cool like decisions or strategy there, but built around Rage and Rage Drives and Rage Arts that all come into factor in the game. Now, that being said, maybe, you know, the Rage damage is too high, or Rage Drives are too high, or the damage in general is too high and there's issues with it. But I think what Rage offers with like a set of tools that now exist because you're in Rage and the strategy of using those tools is cool. So then, you know, these are a couple of comeback mechanics that to me, there's nuance in their design. There's interesting. And then there's X Factor. X Factor is like the one thing where sometimes you are just winning. And then the third character comes in and X Factors and you die before any, like, that's it. It's a far bigger percentage than I can think of for almost any other comeback factor. A good point is Fatal Blow. Someone brought up Fatal Blow earlier. Fatal Blows are they're a bit degenerate. Yeah, like if they don't hit, like you don't get punished for it, and they were maybe like too safe on block. I think that Fatal Blows have interesting decision making in the sense that you have to decide when to spend them. Do I spend them now? Do I spend them in the second round, third round, last round? Do I save them? Am I going to use them in this situation? You know, characters who have Fatal Blow dash cancels and stuff are really powerful because their Fatal Blows have more effect to them than others. Some characters have super strong, right, Fatal Blows, and some are very swing heavy, some are just kind of okay. There's cool ideas there, but perhaps they need to be tuned down. But yeah, I think one of the important things to think about when it comes to comeback mechanics, and this is, I think, hard for some people to latch their brains around in fighting games, is this idea. In many rounds, both players use them or neither player uses them. There will be some rounds where you just don't get it because, you know, in Tekken, like, you get hit, you get pushed to the wall, you get pushed into Rage, you, Jimmy J. Tran does taunt jet upper and just, you just mock kick, mock punch, dead. And you're like, well, so much for my Rage. But if you look at the, you know, the course of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 games, right? Those are usually the edge cases. What's important to point out is that games can have cool comeback mechanics in them that are designed in interesting ways that add to the game rather than detract from it, right? And that's totally fine. You can also make fighting games without comeback mechanics that are fantastic. I think KI's instincts are fantastic, and the game without instinct would certainly be much worse. Yeah, that's one thing that people, I think, as Infill brings up, some people struggle with is like, do you think the V system in Street Fighter 5 is cool? And someone's like, no, I hate G. And it's like, okay, well, think overall about whatever it's called, the V system, and consider if it's cool or not. What if you just love Aegis Reflector and you have all these sick Aegis mix-ups and you really think Aegis Reflector is super cool? Should V-Trigger not exist so that Urian can have Aegis Reflector every round? Or should you just not have Aegis at all? Would a comeback mechanic benefit the design of your game, and does it make the game more interesting is the question you have to ask. Yeah, you might be right about that, Ryan. I think of V-Trigger as a comeback mechanic because one of the primary ways you build it is by losing life. But the context of V-Trigger, you can build it without taking damage, right? And you don't have to be in the deficit to use the V system. You can use your V skill and your V reversal without being at a deficit. Is it done perfectly? No, but I think it adds more to the game than it removes. Comeback mechanics could also be considered late game mechanics. That's a way to think about them, I guess. Fighting games nobody really talks about the late game in fighting games because matches are so fast, correct? Yeah, Third Strike Chan is definitely a late game character. She's still good in the early game, right? You don't want to let her farm. Once she's farmed, it's over. She's just a hyper carry. You just can't beat her once she has meter. I think the biggest thing that people should carry over from other games or other genres is win conditions. That's the biggest thing that you should consider. The thing that will elevate your game plan is understanding win conditions and how to prevent them. And I think many comeback mechanics are defeated with this understanding. I think overall comeback mechanics are cool as long as they're designed correctly. Like most things in the fighting game, as long as there's like a lot of thought in whatever it is, I think they're fine. Yeah, uni system mechanics are so cool. Honestly, grid is one of the most interesting system mechanics in any fighting game to me. It's just so fascinating. Anything that creates additional decision making in fighting games in general is cool. And if your system mechanic can do that outside of impact happening on the screen, you've got something good. You're not just fighting on the screen for what will happen now. This mechanic on the screen, this little clock that's spinning around, will make you think to yourself like, should I even attack right now? Or should I even defend in this certain way? Or should I even do this thing because of this grid that's going to happen there? And once I have this option from this, right, if I win the cycle, my decision making completely changes on what I can do. When I've won Vorpal and I can CS, I'm like, okay, cool. I can get out of this defensive situation with this. I can use it in this way, right? It creates an interesting set of decision making. So even in that game, right, you'll be on defense and you'll be like, I'm going to stop shielding on defense and just block because I'm going to win the cycle. Your opponent knows if I just attack, he'll just sit there and wait. And now, because of that, he's going to win the cycle. So I got to run up and throw him or run up and do something to like steal grid from him because I'm going to lose the cycle. It creates that decision making that's not even related to my character's plus your character's negative, etc. That is so cool. Do they then counterattack? Do they then not attack? If I run up and challenge in that situation, am I going to get hit and then lose the cycle anyway? Or do I win the cycle? If I got hit there, would running up be strategically correct to win the cycle but get hit? That's a decision you have to make. If you can play a fighting game for forever and always think to yourself, I'm not sure if that was the right choice there. Was that the right choice there? I have to sit and think about it. That is good. When is Max going to show up on stream with a bomber jacket and a backwards hat and a beard grown in and shades? He's just going to be sitting at the park disgruntled. You turn into a dad, you just change. He doesn't even say dudes anymore. What up, fellas? Hype and rage? More like naps and bottles, fellas. Benny.